Right, we're going to change tack slightly for this next session. We're going to talk about crisis management and working with the media. Dun dun dun. So I think it would be fair to say that schools often have a rather adversarial relationship with the media. That might be putting it lightly for some of you, based on your own personal experiences. And there are many cases, of course, when a school does not want to be in the headlines, but for one reason or another, it finds that that's the case. And when we look back at the past few years, one of the cases where this happened that really stands out, I think, not just to those in the education sector or the media, but the country at large, was the Mangatipopo Gorge canyoning tragedy, in which Elam Christian College lost a teacher and 6 students. Now, in situations like that, what usually happens is the story breaks and journalists are dispatched to the location en masse, complete with cameras and live trucks and all the rest of it to cover it. And very quickly, now with the age of social media and the like, information becomes readily accessible. Often names of the deceased, for example, are published on social media before the police have had a chance to even formally notify the next of kin. So this relationship and the challenges that surround it are changing rapidly as technology changes as well. In the case of the Gorge canyoning tragedy, a number of things were quite unique and quite different about how that particular event was handled by the school. The school made a very rapid decision to be as open as possible. Mark Sainsbury tells a story about how he was invited to a meeting with the principal and 2 members of the board of trustees, one of whom had a child who was on the trip. At this stage it wasn't clear where the students were or how many lives potentially had been lost. And the school decided, rather than keeping the media at arm's length outside the front gate, as usually happens in a position that I've found myself in many times before, the school was going to take a completely opposite strategy and invite the media, invite the cameras into the school. The school provided sandwiches for all the journalists standing on the street outside, and Mark says that at the start of this coverage, some people, they weren't used to it, they weren't quite sure whether they should accept the sandwiches, but they realised, journalists are always suspicious, what's the ulterior motive? And so the school let the reporters and the cameras in, and they said, come and share in this experience with us. Come and share in our grief. Rather than hiding the names or identities of the students, obviously with the consent of families, those names were released. Photos of the deceased students were handed out to media, and cameras were allowed to film in the assembly. Now, this dramatically changed the way that that story was told, and the journalists who covered it described this as being a very unusual experience for them, having covered many similar tragedies before. Mark Sainsbury said in an interview about this subsequently that there was, quote, none of that blame or bitterness that you usually associate with an event like this at that time. The students spoke about their friends that they'd lost. They talked about the happy memories and the attributes that they valued in those students. And Mark also said in this interview that the media felt very protective almost of these kids and of the staff at the school because they'd been given this access, and they were very careful not to take advantage of that. The school subsequently was asked by a media discussion program, a television program that used to exist that's kind of similar to Media Watch on Radio New Zealand, how it felt the media had covered this tragedy, and the school said it was happy with the way that the coverage ran. And I know that this has been used as kind of a textbook example in the years since on how a school can handle a terrible crisis situation like that well, while protecting its community, but also being open with the media and making that relationship work. So what happens when your school is the headline? Pete Burdon is the founder and head trainer of Media Training New Zealand. He specialises in media interview training and crisis communication planning. Pete has master's degrees in both communication management and journalism. He's actually a former education reporter and also a government press secretary, and he works extensively with schools as well. Please welcome Pete Burdon.
It's a pretty good introduction. I think a couple of things just before I get going with this that we just heard is 2 things. Firstly, the best way to help yourself is to actually work with the media and actually help the media, because the media need a story and there will be a story. So it's far better for you to actually control that story and be at the centre of it, and that's exactly what happened in this situation we've been hearing about. Okay, and also at the beginning of a crisis or a negative event, it's very quick. People are either become the villain or the victim. Okay, and in this situation they were the victim, and because they welcomed the media in and all those things they did, they got really good publicity out of it, because it was very obvious they were welcoming the media, because you don't really want to pick a fight with the media. In my book I've got a quote, I can't remember what it was, but never pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel. So I think that's quite a good thing to remember, although there will be times that we're going to talk about here too where you can't be as cooperative as you'd like to be.
Amy School, yes, Pete Burdon here from TVNZ. Look, we've just heard about this bus crash, and just to let you know, we've got a crew coming around the school to talk to the principal. We'll see you in about 5 minutes.
Okay, so what do we do? The best one I heard was you suddenly take leave and let the DP deal with it. That's best so far. The thing is, if you don't know what to do, you're not ready. The hot idea is to be expecting that call, okay? And while it may never happen, I've been actually really quite surprised how many times I've been called in when there has been something pretty seriously go wrong, including a situation identical to that. So what you need to start with is you need what we call a crisis communication plan. And that basically covers you for these sorts of things. And in that crisis communication plan, you need a few things. Firstly, you need to cover a variety of roles. Some people say to me that if we had a crisis, we'd just call in a PR company. Well, you definitely need a PR expert on hand to help. The problem is, in this day and age, again, like we've just heard, what will happen is there'll be a story on social media, probably before you even know there's an issue. And it will also be, and then it will be on news media websites, and then that will go out through social media. And normally in these situations, all it says from whether it be the school or the business, was they were unavailable for comment or refused to comment. And of course that makes you look like you're hiding something, you don't know what's going on. Clearly that's not true, but that's just what people think. So the first thing you need to do after we've covered, these are some of the roles, there's other roles we haven't really got time to go into huge amounts of detail. But one thing you need to do first, you need to basically predict what could happen. And obviously there are a number of things that could happen, so we're not going to be able to go through absolutely every possibility. But you need to work out what could happen, and you've got to create what we call holding statements. Okay, these are media statements where you basically just need to fill in the gaps, and then you send that out to all your database. You send that to all your parents, whoever your staff obviously need to get all this, and then a very close second will be the media. Because as I said before, like there's going to be stories about this, so you want to be controlling them, and that's why you need to be in those early stories that the media run. Because that's also where people make up their mind who's at fault here. It's in that first story they see, and if all it says from you is refuse to comment, it looks like you're not onto it. At the very least you don't know what's going on. And of course, why would you? But again, that's just what people think, so you need to be prepared for that. The next things you need to do, you need to, obviously you need to work out who needs to be communicated with, and you need a comprehensive list of those people. Because I often do training sessions on this, and we always do a brainstorm and always come up with another group that would need to be contacted. For example, if it's anything to do with the school, your insurer is probably someone you need to contact pretty quickly. Okay, obviously a lawyer in some situations. People like me are always a bit nervous about lawyers because lawyers are always trying to keep you out of jail, whereas PR people like me are trying to maintain their reputation, and sometimes it doesn't quite go together. But you certainly need both of those people. You've got to work out how you're going to contact these people. Now, you really need to be able to contact them 2 or 3 ways. Obviously, you send an email, well, they might not be reading their emails, so you basically need to have a telephone number, obviously, and that won't be for all your parents. But, that'll be for example, the board chair's obviously going to need to know straight away. Parents of any actual victims are going to need to get a phone call rather than just get an email or a text message. So there's all these communication channels you need to organise as well. And the last thing you need to do in this basic crisis communication plan is organise places. You need places to organise. For example, and I can tell you this is real. It might sound a bit theoretical, but this actually does happen reasonably regularly. As we just heard, what will happen is the reporters will ring like that, or they might just turn up at the school. What are you going to do with them? The last thing you want is them being in the reception area and your receptionist sort of talking to them, not realising that he or she is actually on the record and anything they say could become the story. And then what will happen is emotional parents will turn up, and then you've got a great little situation going on here because you've got reporters wanting a story and you've got all these emotional parents that are angry with you because you haven't told them what's happening. So that doesn't always work well. So what you need to do, and you need to do it basically as soon as you can, is work out if this happens, where do they get taken, who takes them, and if parents arrive as well, where do they go and who takes them? And this should all be in your crisis communication plan, like, okay, if this happens, you know, the DP's going to take them there, so-and-so's going to take the reporters over there. Okay, another one is where would you have a press conference? And again, a press conference isn't like necessarily all this, I mean, I've seen press conferences at schools where they've been done in the classroom and all the big reporters sit down in little kids' chairs like this, which is quite funny. But then I actually organised one a few years ago that was outside. It was just outside the principal's office. So, and you don't need all sorts of elaborate gear, but you do need to know where that would happen. Because you don't want something to just hit, you get that phone call and suddenly, what are we going to do? It's too late. You've got to deal with it and you've got to get something out within half an hour. And you've got to know exactly what, and I can tell you there was anyway, this is definitely the way to do it. Okay, there are those people we talked about who you might need to contact. You can see those, there's a lot of other groups there too that your individual school, the probably community people you would want to contact. If it's a really serious issue, sometimes you even want to get something to the minister, because I'm sure you're all aware, occasionally a reporter in the press gallery will go up to a minister, what do you think of this? And the minister will come up with some stupid comment without actually even knowing what's going on, and that can make you look silly. Okay, now I talked about those holding statements. These are the media statements where you just fill in the gaps and can send them. Now I actually have a little crisis communication template for schools that I could talk to anyone about later if you wanted to. This is one of the holding statements in it, and you can see here just statement from, you put the principal's or whoever the spokesperson's name is in there regarding the incident. And then it's just basic stuff like here, like, we've just learnt, you can read that anyway. So you fill in those gaps and you send it. And that's basically that's the format you use. It doesn't have to be elaborate or anything. And what that does, it shows people you know what's going on, you're dealing with it, and the media have got something from you in their first story that goes out. That's all it does. And it gives you a couple of hours to organise yourself after that. Any questions or comments on any of this stuff? I mean, just feel free to throw them at me if you've got anything you want to talk about.
Peter?
Yep.
We had one of these incidents at school where the police involved.
Yep.
They added another whole layer
Yep.
as to time that they took. They've got quite a serious incident. So you're going to cover, they wanted to interview everybody, and that took teachers and everybody else. We don't have a big enough school to cover it, so it's just interesting to see what you might think about how we employ people to look after the kids and all the staff as well.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. There's a few things there. Firstly, it's difficult to prepare too much for the police, because what will happen, particularly if it's a school camp or even locally, it would be just a standard bobby cop that would turn up to the emergency, and then they would ascertain how serious it is. And if it's seen as that serious, then they get the big brass, some superintendent or someone would come in and take over. And absolutely what you can do there is, when it comes to these press conferences and things we're talking about, you can actually suggest having combined ones. And the other thing about being tied up with those interviews, you can still get your statement out. You still get that out, because, and there's two things here too, that the police are going to be concerned about the investigation. Your whole message, and we're going to get on to messages in a minute, your whole message will be empathy for your kids, what you're doing to help, all those sorts of things. So it'll be a totally different message from what the police are offering. So, but it is really important you get that first statement out, and then you've got, you've got those few hours or whatever it might be to do all that stuff. Okay, so now when there is, whether it's a crisis or just a media interview you're doing, you need to have a message for it. Okay, and as you're all aware, a media story is generally anything from 150 to about 400 words. On TV it's a minute and a half. So you've really got very few words to play with, and the more you say, the more you're giving the reporter a choice about what's going to be used. Because if you, and I'm sure some of you guys out there have either had an issue with it, or you know people who have, you talk for this long, and then the reporter pulls that little piece out there and that's the story. And that's totally out of context, that has no relevance to what you're actually talking about. Unfortunately, that's just the way it works, because reporters are always just going to take what they think is the most interesting part of your answers. And if they don't make sense or they're out of context, well, you just basically have to take responsibility for that. You just have to make sure that anything you say can be used by itself. And we're going to have a look at how we do that. Now, I talked about the 3-point, the media message I talked about, the 3-point message, whether it be a media interview or a crisis. What that is, it's the 3 most important points you want to get across in this interview or in this campaign, whatever it might be. I mean, even the political parties have 3-point messages for their campaigns at the moment. There are 3 things. It's got to be clear. Okay, you don't use jargon or anything. A lot of people think the more sophisticated words they use, the more intelligent they'll seem. Well, it's actually the opposite. You think of all the great communicators you can remember in the world, like Clinton, Obama, JFK. They always use the most basic language. Apparently Winston Churchill needed a damn good reason to have a word of more than 2 syllables when in a speech anyone wrote for him, because he knew that people don't hear how they read. Okay, next thing, it's got to be interesting. It's got to be of interest to the reporter or the audience of the reporter. And thirdly, it's got to be brief. When I say brief, you have 3 points, 25 seconds. So that's 8 seconds per point. And that might not seem much, but it's actually a lot more than you think. And what we're going to do, we're going to come back to this message all the time, and we're going to talk about how we do that soon. But you can see if you keep coming back to your message, you're going to be happy with anything, aren't you? Because it's your message. You are going to answer the questions, but you're going to do that briefly, and then you're going to transfer back to your points. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we do that shortly. Now, this is a media message that a couple of years ago that I saw with John Key. You can see he got the 3-point message out early in this interview, which I'm going to show you here, but then he kept coming back to it again and again. And we haven't got time to watch him come back to it again and again. But it will show you the message and how simple it is and how brief it is.
And our idea is one that says, look, New Zealand can't keep borrowing money at $380 million a week.
First point.
Can't get New Zealanders exposed to high interest rates.
Second point.
New Zealanders need to have a plan for jobs.
For jobs. Okay, so they were the 3 points that he got out, and he kept coming back to those later in that interview. And it doesn't matter whether it's a live interview or a taped interview, you're still going to do the same thing. Because firstly, you want any interview or communication you have to be an opportunity for you to get some points across. I know most of you guys, I'm sure, as most people, see the media as a threat, and that's totally understandable. But it can also be an opportunity. Even if it's a really disastrous situation, a bit like the one we just heard about. If you can show that you care, that you're doing everything you can to help, that the safety of your kids is so important to you, you can actually come out looking really good. Not that you'd wish that you'd wish it to happen, but you can actually come out looking good. But if you sort of go to ground, don't give the media anything, keep them out, they're still going to write their stories, but they haven't got you to be the centre of that, so they're going to go and find emotional parents, they're going to go and find all sorts of other angles, because they need that story. Okay, there's one more thing we need to do with this media message, and this is a little bit because of the times, is that you've got to dress them up. You've got to dress the points up into attractive ways that the media will like to use. Okay, so I've got a few examples here, but let's just come up with a little media message of our own here now. And some of you guys, I can see that have done some of my training, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about here. But I have this system when it's a negative event called the 3R system. Okay, and that's where each of these 3 points I'm talking about begin with an R. And the first one is regret. Okay, so that's just a statement, something like, our hearts go out to the family of the victim, or our hearts go out to the family of Johnny, or whoever, you know, if the name's out. So that can be the first point. Because so often that's the missing point. So many people forget that what people actually want to know is that you care. Hikia Prada, and some of you probably laugh at this too, but she's not very good at this either. I mean, I always use this example in my trainings as well, that like when she closed a lot of Canterbury schools a few years ago, you know, she'd said, well, why are you closing the schools? And she just said, because the population's moved, we have to change the roles. Well, that's fine, but the first thing she should always have said is, hey, look, I realise it must be really tough on all these guys having to move schools. You know, how much better does that sound? And then you think, oh, well, at least she understands that. And everyone does that. Well, not everyone does it, but so many people forget that. So that's your first point. The second point is your response, second R. What are you doing about it? What are you doing to help? And that might just be something like, you know, we're doing all we can to help the, you know, the victim's family and friends, something like that. And the third one, reassurance. And the reassurance can be, it could be something like, you know, we're having a massive review to make sure this doesn't happen again, or it could be just the safety of our students is our top priority. Okay, so you can see how those are the three R's are quite good, because it shows you care, it shows that you're doing stuff, and it shows that you, it's really important to you that this doesn't happen again, or that your kids are really important to you, your safety is. Because one other way I talk about looking at that is, if you could write the first 3 sentences in tomorrow's, whatever your local paper is, what would they be? Because if you don't know, you're not ready. If you don't know, you're turning this interview into a Q&A. And I know a lot of you are probably going, well, of course it's a Q&A. Well, it's actually not a Q&A. The reporter's coming up with a topic. You get to decide what you're going to say about that topic. Bearing in mind that it's got to be clear, interesting and brief, like we talked about before. So we're helping the reporter as well. It's not about spin, it's just about having our own points we want to get across. It's a little bit, it's quite a classic little quote from the late 1960s. I don't know if some of you might have heard of it. Henry Kissinger said, he walked into a press conference and he said, has anyone got any questions for my answers? So there is a bit of truth to that. So the one thing I really want you to go away from here thinking is that, you know, it's not a Q&A. It's not. You have a huge opportunity. And when you make it into a Q&A, of course you're going to get nervous because you're more worried about what the questions are going to be. And we are going to answer the questions as I said, but we can actually come up with our own points. And I'm going to show you how we can really influence them getting across into the stories in a minute as well. Can anyone remember Colin Craig? Now, it's a classic example of someone that didn't have a message. Because, can you remember like the chemtrails? He got asked, oh Colin, do you think chemtrails are a government conspiracy? You know, the chemtrails coming out the back of planes, and apparently they're all dumbing us all down, and we were just going to give way to whatever government policy came about. But of course it's, you know, I don't know about you, but it sounds like a bit of a nut job to me. But anyway, you know what he said? I don't know. So what's the journalist thinking about? Journalists are thinking about the chemtrails, because that's the last thing that got talked about. But what if he had said, I don't know, or I don't think so, but what I do know, transferring back to his point, the government has far too much power over our lives, which is why we need binding referendums, which was Conservative Party policy in the first place. So you can see that's just a really good example as well, how your own message can keep you out of trouble. Because, I mean, you might get asked, we'll talk about a few traps when we get through a little bit here, but you could get asked, has your school got a really serious problem with bullying? You know, your natural response would be no. And that's fine. Of course you'll say no. The thing is, the reporter's still thinking about the bullying, and that's what the focus of the story is probably going to be. But if you said no, and then you said something like, our school's just unbelievably amazing at maths and we've got the highest pass rate in the country, or whatever your message may be, well then, oh okay, that's interesting. And then that becomes the issue, you see. So you have a huge amount of power here. And also remember, the reporter's coming to you because you're the expert. Without you, there's no story. Or, I mean, unless it's a real crisis situation, and then there'll still be a story. So the one thing we can do to dress this media message up is we can create our own sound bites. Now, you know what sound bites are? The bits on the TV news where the person's quoted verbatim, they last from anything to 5 to 15 seconds. In the newspaper, they're actually the bits between the speech marks. Okay, news stories all need, and reporters need these. So what they want really interesting sound bites and quotes, because the stories depend on it, whether it be TV, radio or print. So what we can do to really sometimes almost guarantee that our points get across is we can dress up the 3 key points of ours into those sound bites. So we're making the same point in a different way. Okay? That gives you huge power. And it also stops you sounding like a broken record because you're not coming back to the same... I mean, how many times do you see someone on TV just going back to exactly the same point all the time? And it's sort of obviously, it doesn't sound very credible, does it? I'll just give you a few examples of this. Now, John Key was an expert. Okay, he always used the All Blacks with his sound bites. And there's one example, some of you guys have probably heard this one. A couple of years ago when New Zealand were trying to get a seat on the Security Council of the UN, we had all the delegates coming out here and we were whining and dining them to try and get them to vote for us for the seat. Okay, now a reporter asked John Key, which he would have been expecting, was how much is a taxpayer having to spend on these delegates coming out here? Okay, so the point he was making was, I can't tell you that because that will give ammunition to our opponents for the seat. Okay, fair enough. That's a fair point. But he didn't say it that way. He said it this way. He said, me telling you what the New Zealand taxpayer spent on those delegates would be like Steve Hansen giving the England rugby team the All Blacks game plan for next Saturday's test. So see what he's done? He's made the point. He's made it in a really interesting way. And he knows they're going to use that. I mean, who's not going to use that? That's a classic, amazing quote. Everyone wins. And that's, like I said before, the idea is you want to make it so everyone wins. You get your point across, like John Key did, the reporter gets a good story. Because if you just sort of sit there and answer the questions yes, no, and don't really give much information, there's a lot of pressure on that reporter. And in my media training sessions I do for the last couple of years, one of the mock interviews I always do is getting the people in the training to interview each other. And sometimes, so rather than you being the person answering the reporter's questions, you're actually asking those questions. And it's a really interesting dynamic because, some people are just like, some of you guys are just awesome reporters and, probably in the wrong job, to be honest. But then others can't stand it. They go, oh my God, that was way worse than being interviewed. Because, if you're not getting some good information from the person you're interviewing, you're in trouble because you've got to get a story away. And that's often when they go negative because it's very easy to go negative. But if you can help them out and do what John Key does, chances are you're going to get some really good coverage. Now, there's another example of this that I used actually. I'll just give you a few different examples to show you how it actually works. Some of you guys actually were involved in this. Last year I did this little campaign for this little girl that needed a kidney transplant. And she needed to make $350,000, and I think now she needs to make a heck of a lot more than that even. So I did a little campaign where a number of schools had a mufti day, and all the proceeds went to, and we made about $28,000, so it was quite a good little campaign. But I did some media interviews on it, okay, and I'm just going to show you one of the points. Read the point at the top. If everyone gives a few dollars, we could make this money easily. Okay, that was one of my 3 key points I used in that interview. But the one the media used was me saying it. See soundbite? See what I've said there? If we can come up with $2 million to buy a beach, we can raise a fraction of that to save Maddie's life. What's going to get used? You just know that's going to get used, don't you? And sure enough, that was what they used. So you can come that close to writing the story yourself, if you can come up with the right soundbites. And there are a heap of different elements you can use too that we haven't really got time to go into here. But analogies like what John Key used with the All Blacks are a great one. That's obviously an analogy as well. I used to work for Maurice Williamson, and this shows how old I am. This was in the last national government before this one. But just before I started working for him, I don't know if you remember, in the late 90s, National were going to have tax cuts, and they decided they couldn't. And of course, Maurice Williamson's fairly sort of to the right of National, or probably should be an act anyway. But he got asked that, and the first time he answered the question, "How do you feel about National not having the tax cuts?" he said, "I've got mixed feelings about it." Okay, again, that's okay. It's nothing overly exciting about that. But then he got asked it again, and I'm not recommending you do this, but I'm just showing you how powerful it can be. The second time he got asked, rather than say he's got mixed feelings about it, he said, "It's a bit like my mother-in-law driving off a cliff and my brand new BMW." So you can imagine how some people thought it was funny and other people thought it was horrendously offensive. So I certainly wouldn't recommend that. Okay, now we'll just talk a little bit about body language, because body language is really important. I mean, if you do have a nightmare situation, which again, hopefully you won't, there will come a time when you have to do TV interviews. And if you're doing a TV interview, talking about one of your kids has died, there's been a bus crash or whatever it might be, your body language becomes way more important than the words. And there's research to show, this was done in the 1970s, the research showed that with emotional issues, what people take out of your interview is 55% body language, 37% the tone of your voice, and 7% your words. Okay, so that's kind of why this guy didn't work. You remember David Shearer?
As a leader, this was necessary for this to happen, and we needed to move forward. I want to get this behind us, and I want to move on into the areas that, the issues that New Zealanders are most interested in.
So you see, it didn't really look like the next Prime Minister, eh? And it was what he said was great, and I remember reading that in New Zealand Herald the following day, and look, this had to happen, it's now time to move on and deal with the areas New Zealanders care about. I mean, great message. But you don't really hear the message, do you? You're more looking at who's this, he doesn't look, has he just won something or did he lose? He just won a coup against them. And a big thing with this too, which surprises a lot of people with body language, is that it's actually hand movement that makes a huge difference. And I've noticed this so much lately with Bill English, because he used to be so dry and sit there like this, and there's that real farmer thing going on, and it was like, oh yeah, we've got the books in order and it's going to be great, But now he's moving his hands and he's getting all because it changes the tone of your voice. You can see now my tones are going up and down, I seem far more passionate, whereas if I'm doing this, it's like, oh, it's not so interesting, is it? I sound really boring. And that's what most people do, that's how most people talk. So that's really important. Someone that did this well was David Cunliffe. I've just got a good little example of him here.
I've got a really clear memory of looking out and seeing the eyes and the faces of those thousands of people that came to the meetings and looking at their hopes and their dreams for a Labour Party that's renewed, that can take on key, that can win in 2014, not for ourselves but for them. And if I'm entrusted with this job, it's for them that I'm going to work my guts out and work with my colleagues and presenting.
So unity was a key message you got.
Unity for victory, victory for our people.
So, I mean, some people, in my training, sometimes people say, oh, I use too many arms or I use too many R's. You don't worry about that. Like John Key, he ums and ahs all the time. Can anyone ever remember the William Webb-Ellis Twopi? That was after the 2011 World Cup. But see, everyone loved that, you know. So you want to be a normal person. The only criticism I'd have of him is he's so slick. It's almost perfect, you know. You think, oh, gee, this looks too good, you know. But it does show you there the importance of the hand movement. Okay. Now, one thing everyone always likes to talk about, or probably more like doesn't like to talk about, there are a number of traps you can fall into with a media interview that you wouldn't even know were there. I mean, some people have come to me with a news story from a newspaper and said, this is the story, I didn't say that. And then you actually dig a bit further, and actually everything in there they did actually say. They just said it in a very sort of long-winded way amongst a lot of other things. Because I can tell you what a reporter will do, whether it's, well, when I was a reporter it was like you used to take notes, I don't know if they do that anymore, but you take all these notes and then you go, oh, thanks very much, and then you go back to your newsroom and you sit down and you go, okay, what am I going to do? Oh shit, that's interesting. Oh, yeah, I can't remember saying that. Okay, I'm going to make that the focus. I'm going to, oh, there's called quote. Yep, okay, yep, done, great. And then suddenly I've got a really good story I didn't even know I had. But you don't realise that my story isn't going to be an absolute summary of what we talked about. I'm going to pick all the little pieces out of it. And that's why this is really, really important, that you have that media message and you come back to it with some sound bites. But I have to emphasise, and I think there's about 25 people in the room that have done this training, have to emphasise that saying this, there's two sides to this. There's theory and practice. It's one thing understanding it. It's something totally different to sit in a chair and actually do an interview with us, trying to answer a question and then transfer back to a key point or a soundbite reflecting on those. It's really difficult. And it's only practice where you do it. I would say it's like riding a bike. You know, you read a book that says, oh, you put your foot there and you swing your leg over and off you go. Sounds great. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. No, next time I need to ride a bike. But in actual fact, as we all know, that's not how it works. But practice certainly makes perfect with this stuff. Now, a few traps. There's one trap here. Now, I'm just going to show you a little video, and I want you to see if you can pick up what was going on here. This is Patrick Gower talking to Bill English about the possibility of a war in North Korea.
You know, New Zealand would potentially support a Korean story.
Well, I certainly would not want to speculate on that because by far the preferred option is a diplomatic process.
Yeah, of course, but you won't rule out supporting a Korean construction in South Korea.
Well, as I said, I just would not want to speculate on it, and I think everyone's trying very hard not to create a problem by imagining what it might look like. Diplomatic pressure, sanctions pressure are by far preferable.
Sure. Use.
Okay. Did anyone see what Patrick Gower was trying to do there? He's trying to get him to speculate, wasn't he? He just wanted him to not rule out that we could go to war with North Korea. That's all he wanted him to do. But of course, if he said, oh, well, I can't rule that out, suddenly the whole story is going to be, we might be off to war tomorrow with North Korea. And this is also one you guys can fall into. Because if you have a bullying, let's say you have a bullying issue and you've dealt with it, and then me, the reporter, come to you, I might say, can you guarantee this won't happen again? And what would you say to that?
Can you say it again?
There's been a bullying allegation and it's all been dealt with fine, and then I come to you as a reporter and say, can you guarantee this won't happen again? So what do you say? You say you can't guarantee it? No, you can't, can you? It's a catch-22, isn't it? Because you can't say, no, it won't happen again, because you don't know that for sure. But if you say you can't, I mean, you can't say you can guarantee it, but then you can't say you can't guarantee it. So basically what I always recommend people do in those situations is say something you can guarantee. Say, look, I can guarantee that we'll be doing everything we can to sort this out. And then you might get the question again, yeah, but you haven't told me whether it's possible or not. I say, well, look, as I said, we'll be doing all we can to stop it happening again. And then if you get it a third time, I always say, just say, look, I believe I've answered your question. And then flick back to one of your key points again. Because remember, those key points are getting you out of trouble all the time as well. Okay? So that's one of those difficult ones. Okay, there's a few other ones too, like using negative language. Now, I haven't got the clip here, but the old Bill, well, there's a couple of them. Remember Bill Clinton's line, I did not have sexual relations with that woman? What was wrong with that, apart from it being a lie? And that's a big qualification, I know. But let's say that was true. What's wrong with it? It's negative language. She's just given the reporter an amazing quote to actually base the entire story on, and then the story is going to be a language of denial story. Okay, so if I said to you, you've got ridiculous safety laws in your school, your natural reaction might be to say, we haven't got ridiculous safety laws in our school. Then my story will be principal denies lax safety things, and then when asked, Principal Brown said, and it's just awful. So when you get asked something like that, you always go back with a positive version of it. You say, we're really proud of our safety guidelines, or something like that, and then you can see it's totally different. And then people say to me, so what would Bill Clinton have said? So again, you're going to laugh, but we're assuming that was all true. I've always been faithful to my wife. Yeah, you can see that, yeah, I know it's all, yeah, you get the point. Okay, so you can see this, I don't know if you realise there's quite a lot more to a media interview than meets the eye. I mean, it's a totally different conversation than any other one. And like I say, that working out what your message is, transferring back to it all the time is very difficult, but it's a practice thing. And we've talked about the crisis. So basically, in a nutshell, what you need your crisis communication plan, okay, and you need all those statements ready. The other thing I didn't mention there was staff guidelines. Now, what are your staff going to do? What are your staff going to do if a reporter comes to them? Do they know they can't say anything? What do they do on social media? What if one of their friends on social media asks them, hey, what's the story with all this bullying going on at school? So that all has to be in the staff guidelines in the crisis communication plan. And this is all totally different than it was 3 years ago, because social media has changed everything. I mean, in the old days, you just had to worry about tonight's TV news program or tomorrow morning's newspaper. Now you've got to worry what's happening in half an hour. And so that's why you really need this stuff organised. And the last thing on all this is the best way to get ready, I mean, apart from having your plan ready, is to get some really positive coverage out there, even if it's just in your local media. Local media normally love cutesy little stories. I used to be, when I was the education reporter, it was at a daily newspaper, and I always had the chief reporter screaming at me, get me some photos, because I was the education guy, you see. So they knew that I had contact with all the schools. So I would always be trying to find something going on in a school with a couple of kids that I could get a photo of. And that's just fantastic for you guys. If your kids just won the chess competition, whatever it might be, there can be great publicity out there. And just to give you an example of that, I'd mentioned that campaign for the girl that needed the kidney transplant. Part of that campaign, like I said, I got a lot of schools to take part in that. And what I did, I actually wrote media statements, pretty much a generic media statement, and I rang some of those schools and said, hey, would you be interested in getting some media coverage about you having this Mufti Day campaign? And of course, they thought, oh, that's great, that's free publicity. Now, I'm in Christchurch, this girl's in Christchurch, that's a story in the Independent Herald in Wellington. Because the Independent, I can't remember what the name of the school was, they were taking part, so it was a local story, you see. So they thought, great, the local school was doing a Mufti Day campaign. How often do you have a Mufti Day? You must sometimes have lots of really interesting things you're giving money to. I bet you the local media would love some of those. So that was in Wellington. This was Kaipoi North in Christchurch, and it's exactly the same story. It's just got a different school name in it. And there were about 6 others around the country as well. I haven't put them all up there. But that just shows to me how local media are crying out for really good information from you guys. And the thing is, if you do that and then you have a crisis, people think, oh, well, that's that school that's doing all that cool stuff. But if the first time anyone hears of you is in a crisis, that's what they're going to be thinking. So it is really, really, really simple to do. Now, just before I go, I know this isn't a marketing thing for me, but I did mention before how I have a bit of training on offer. I do have this online media interview training course that is basically 10 videos of me going through everything you need to know for a media interview. The unique thing about this is that you see down the left-hand side there are a number of different scenarios. You click on those, on the one relevant to you, and then your webcam opens up here. And you click begin session, and then it's me in the background firing questions at you. You're answering them with the techniques you've learnt. Then you can watch it back, and you can also send it to me for a good track if you want to. As far as I'm aware, it's the only thing in the world, because, like I say, it's all about practice, this stuff. And I know you guys don't have a lot of time always to take a full day out for a training course. So what I'm doing today, I'm going to offer that at $3.95 by itself. And I've also got this crisis communication plan template that covers all these things you need to do here. And then that's the actual plan there itself. It's got all these things in it. You've got 8 different holding statements. You've got staff guidelines. You've got how to handle media phone calls to give to your receptionist. And then I've got this thing called the on-day game plan. There's one of the statements again. This on-day game plan I've put together, which is not science, but it shows you roughly if the thing second from the right is happening, do the thing on the right. Okay, so, because I can tell you, I spoke to a school the other day that had a big issue, and you just don't think straight. So you need something like that to kind of sort of show you what's happening, because you don't want to create something out of nothing either. So that's 44 pages, but you only need about 5 of them on the day. But it's like a game of rugby, you've got to get prepared. Once you're prepared, everything should just flow like it did for, well, I don't mind saying it was Christchurch Boys High a couple of weeks ago. They had a bit of an issue. So that's $3.95 as well, but I'm going to offer today both of them for $5.97, and that's never going to happen again. I charge 6 times that for other niches, and I normally charge double that for schools. So if anyone is interested in that, I've got these expression of interest forms. If you just fill one of those out, I'll ring you next week, but that'll lock you into that price because it's just for this week only, and there's some more of them over there. So if you are interested, give me a yell. Otherwise, I'm happy to take some questions. If we've got a few minutes left. Is there anything anyone would like to know? What's that? One question we got. Yep.
Media people, do you notice the difference when you're dealing with women? Because we're not dealing with a lot of us are women as well, but all these models are male. And is there a difference when you're interviewing from females or not really?
When you're being interviewed or when you're interviewing?
So if we were a female principal in a crisis situation, kia ora, Brian from Rotakawa School. If a female principal in a crisis situation, or when you've been interviewing, have you noticed any difference that you receive kind of in the story or the way it's portrayed by women to men? Because I know a lot of these examples we've seen today are all guys, whereas, we could have had Helen Clark or someone, you guys would have come in touch with those people?
Well, I mean, one thing I will say, 2 things really quickly, I think we're out of time. Firstly is that when it comes to sort of being empathetic, which in these situations we're talking about probably going to be empathetic, I always find women are far better at expressing that. But as far as everything you need to do, it's exactly the same. The only thing is we haven't done today is that, like with body language, like when you're sitting, if you're sitting down at a table, like if you're going to cross your legs, because women like crossing legs, if you can cross them down at the bottom, it's far better. Otherwise, you kind of look like you're all kind of on the defensive back like this. So you're just crossing your legs under there. But otherwise, I mean, it's really, I have looked into that because I've actually looked at doing some media training for women too. But everyone around the world agrees that there's really no difference. 3, 2, 1. right.
Thank you, Mark.